Hello and welcome back to the Pain Free for Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Vanbergen, and today I'm joined once again by Karta Purkh Singh Khalsa, who goes by KP. KP is an herbalist, nutritionist, yoga teacher, and educator who's been making holistic health approaches palatable to the modern mind for over 50 years. He was the first person to be professionally certified in both herbalism and Ayurveda in the US. He is President Emeritus of the American Herbalist Guild and Director Emeritus of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. In this episode, we talk all about Ayurvedic medicine, its connections to traditional Chinese medicine, which you might be more familiar with, and yoga, and how all of this can be utilized to help manage or resolve chronic pain. Actionable tips, once again, available right now.
Welcome back to Pain Free for Life, where we share how to successfully overcome all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And now, here's your host, co-founder, and board-certified holistic healthcare practitioner, Dr. Rob Vanbergen.
KP, welcome back to the show.
Hi, my pleasure.
So today we're going to be talking about Ayurveda. So this is a topic that a lot of my clients will probably know of, but not know much about beyond like the kind of concept of some basic stuff like chakras and things like that we work with already. So what is Ayurveda and where did it come from?
Well, Ayurveda is the ancient holistic healing system from South Asia. It's the sister science of yoga, or the flip side of the coin of yoga, although to call it a sister science is probably even to separate it too much. It is the same thing. It's the medical branch of yoga, the medical aspect of yoga. So many people hear about Ayurveda from the yoga world. They take a yoga class and it's mentioned, something like that. Yoga and Ayurveda do actually have slightly different origins, but for our purposes, they're essentially the same thing. They come from the same philosophy, the same structure. And so yoga practitioners practice and recommend Ayurveda, and Ayurvedic doctors practice and recommend yoga. They're thoroughly integrated now. So it's a natural healing system that's very complete. So all the various modalities that we think about in natural medicine, diet, herbs, exercise, and many more, are all incorporated into Ayurveda. Very similar to Chinese medicine in that way. And in fact, it's thought archaeologically that Chinese medicine evolved out of Ayurveda. So they're really 90% identical. There's a little difference in worldview, and of course, vocabulary is different because of different languages. And herbal medicines that grow in China are different than those that grow in India, but structurally very similar.
Right. Okay. One thing that comes up a lot with my clients when I bring up anything even touching on this is people seem to have this idea that Ayurveda is very spiritual. And in some cases, they don't want to do anything spiritual that goes against their own existing beliefs. From a medicine standpoint, like, is there a divide, or is all Eastern medicine spiritual to a degree? And how would you kind of break that up?
I would say that all Eastern medicine is spiritual to a degree, but that doesn't necessarily mean any particular religion. Ayurveda itself actually is an atheist system. The founder who wrote the original kind of encyclopedia of it, the philosophy that it's based on, was an atheist. Oh. So it's not necessarily something that involves religion per se. It's just it involves the entire human. So physically, mentally, and spiritually. On the spiritual side, whatever that means to you. So religiously, India is very diverse. So there are people of many different religions and philosophies in India, and we all get along together. We may practice differently, but there's certainly the vast majority of people in India are what we would call Hindus, people that practice Vedic religions of some kind. But there are Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, of course, Muslims. I'm Sikh. There are a small percentage of Sikhs in India, and it's not about that. Ayurveda would encourage you to have practice that relates to higher vibrational states or your own spiritual self, but doesn't dictate which one that would be.
Okay, perfect. That makes a lot of sense. It's always been kind of a divide of like, we look at it from an energy perspective and the holistic piece, and it's just trying to convince people of that point. So that's absolutely perfect. So As far as the basics go, what are the basic principles of Ayurveda?
Ayurveda is an energy medicine system. It relies on things that you can feel with your own body or observe with your own senses. So we talk about things like temperature. Is your body running too fast and therefore too hot and using up energy that it doesn't need to be, or the opposite, too cold? You could call those hypermetabolic or hypometabolic, but otherwise, every other kind of thing that you could experience in your life, your digestion, your sleep, just everything like that. We can use modern medical methods to integrate with Ayurveda, no problem with that. But it evolved at a time before those things were available. So we don't need those things. An energy medicine, and the basic underlying issue is that we're going to bring you back to the middle with everything. So we don't want your body to be running too fast or too slow. We don't want you to be overweight or underweight, et cetera. All those things right in the middle.
Right. And that sounds very similar to TCM, right? Traditional Chinese medicine, where you're trying to get that energy balance in the meridians, and too much and too little are not things we want to have.
Exactly.
Is there one that tends to dominate more than another? Like, do people tend to have like too much, too little when they're dealing with things like chronic pain?
If you look all over the world, people tend to be all over the place on the spectrum of all those various energies. But people in pain usually have a body that's too cold and dry. So by cold, we mean the speed of metabolism, metabolic rate. Excuse me. How efficiently are you digesting food, getting those nutrients out to the cells, et cetera? So we want that to be right at the optimal speed for the body. So most people have that. They're cold, and then they tend to be dry. In other words, they lack the lubrication that the body needs, that beautiful slime that our body requires to for everything to slip over itself in your body. So that kind of dryness would create, of course, things like dry hair, dry skin, dry eye, but also dry large intestine, leading to constipation. So there's very much a connection from the Ayurvedic perspective between pain, anxiety, insomnia, and constipation. Not everybody is going to have all those things, and the degree is going to vary, but that's the typical scenario.
Right. Okay. So you mentioned at the beginning, you talked about yoga. So how intricately connected to Ayurveda is yoga? If you practice yoga, are you practicing Ayurveda, or and vice versa?
Yeah, they both come from the same system, the same ideas about energy. The technical difference is that Ayurveda is atheistic, as I mentioned, and yoga is theistic. So Ayurveda doesn't relate to a creator deity of the universe necessarily. We would call it more agnostic. The founders just said, we don't have any evidence of that, so we're just going to ignore that. Yoga is about uniting your consciousness with the Godhead, or the creator of the universe, or the energy of the universe, but not about a particular religion. So either of these systems can be used very specifically, kind of, mechanistically or something like that, where you're just worried about the energies of the body and you're not so concerned about universal questions like that. So people can do yoga exercises that are not aimed at any kind of spiritual development. They're just for your sore back or whatever. Ayurveda, same thing. Both the systems would like you to evolve as a human and be all that you can be, and eventually develop your body, your mind, and your spirit. Yoga is more specifically really to develop your mind, actually. But you can use any of the techniques. The Ayurveda yoga system is just huge. And so you can take practices from that and use it however you like.
So this is going to be a big piece of the puzzle, I think, here. But whenever we're talking about holistic well-being, we're always looking at the whole body, and a big part of that is food. So how big of a role, and what role does food play in Ayurvedic medicine and Ayurveda in general?
It's the most important thing for most people over the course of a lifetime. So over 50 years, because you're putting food in your body every single day, the food that you eat and how you digest it and how your body uses it is the most consistent and important thing, and the place that for most modern people, we can make the greatest impact. For the next 50 days, not that important. Food is mild. it has a bunch of phytochemicals that are good for us and that we need, but it has relatively small amounts of those compared to herbal medicines. And again, the difference between herbs and food is only just in the use of them. So herbs are things that tend to have a concentration of a particular phytochemical that's going to benefit a certain situation, and we can take them easily in relatively small amounts compared to, let's say, something like beets. A lot of research on beets lately for cardiovascular issues and endurance, stamina and endurance, that kind of thing. So, is the beet a medicine? Yeah, it's a medicinal food as opposed to other things that might have similar benefits that we might call an herbal medicine. It's a spectrum. Ayurveda says that there's nothing that's not good for somebody, and there's something that's good for everybody. So not everybody resonates with every particular kind of thing. Everything in Ayurveda is individual. So there's no ideal diet, no ideal remedies, no ideal practices. It's a question of, again, bringing that energy back to the middle. If you're too hot, we're going to suggest using cooling food and vice versa. And through all those energetic qualities, we want to bring that back to the middle. And we can do that by food. The basic principle in Ayurvedic therapy is to have everything going in the same direction. So many of the things that Ayurveda does are really persnickety, tiny little rules, and in and of themselves, probably not a big deal. Ayurveda doesn't like you drinking ice water with your meals, for example, because it slows down the circulation of blood in your stomach and reduces digestion. Is that the end of the world? No, that's one tiny thing. But the idea is to make your decisions, your food preparation, your decisions about what to eat, the way you sleep, how you dress, all those things going all in the same direction, and then it makes a huge difference.
I'd be interested to hear your opinion on. I mean, obviously in America, we have this really big issue with processed foods. And so people eat processed foods all the time. In the short term, you said within 50 days, for example, diet doesn't matter as much. But over the lifetime here, are people ever able to get any value out of all these processed, prepackaged, junky foods? Or are they just playing a role in disease and not healing?
The answer to the question is no, there's no value. I guess from a technical perspective, yeah, they have some calories and probably some vitamins, but we're seeing in the recent scientific studies over and over again the role of processed foods and their negative effects on people. So not only have the nutrients been reduced by the processing, but other things have been added that are not good. And it took a long time for us to kind of really wake up to that idea. People like me have been involved in this for over 50 years. Yeah, we were talking about those things from day one, but nobody thought very seriously about it, and scientists didn't look at it very much. But now the tide has really turned, and their mainstream medical organizations are now suggesting that people eat whole, unprocessed food.
Right. And that's where all of this comes into the healing of the body instead of the destruction of the body. And, I grew up in England, and it was definitely different. Like, I still remember the difference between what is in even what we call processed foods, like 2 or 3 ingredients on a box, versus the same thing in the States when I moved there with 30 ingredients in it. 28 of them I couldn't pronounce. So it's scary stuff. It definitely is. Okay. So now you mentioned the concentrations of the nutrients and things that we need being stronger in herbal medicine than they are in foods. And so while over the course of a lifetime, if we're eating good, healthy food, we're going to be absorbing these positive things from that food. Obviously, herbal medicine plays a big role. And I remember in our last podcast we talked about some remedies in there and some herbs specifically. But from an Ayurvedic perspective, what is the role of herbal medicine?
Yeah, there's no specific definition of an herb in any system of herbal medicine. They have the same constituents as food. They just tend to be more concentrated. So the plants we choose to use as what we would call herbal medicine are just things that have more of something in there so you can get it in easier. Herbal medicines are the drugs of Ayurveda, if I could say it that way. So Ayurveda is a very broad spectrum system that includes lifestyle practices, meditation, how to sleep, I mean, literally everything you'd ever want to do. There's a persnickety rule in Ayurveda about how to do it. There's a rule about which nostril you should be breathing out of when you step over the threshold of your home to leave for work in the morning. I mean, it's that specific.
Wow.
Nobody, by the way, could ever remember and accomplish all those things. There are thousands of them. We just do our best, to hit the major ones. So herbal medicine is very much a key. It would be quite rare to go to an Ayurvedic practitioner and not get a recommendation for herbal medicine. They might say less about other lifestyle issues or body work or something, but herbs are almost always in there. So food and herbs, very much key. Many, many other things that are in the system itself.
Do these have to be adapted to different systems? Like, are some of these herbs just hard or impossible to get in North America versus in the East? Or what I'm saying is, really, do we need to use different herbs to achieve the same effect? Or is it always focused on this herb is good for this herb is good for this, and that's what you need?
It's a really tricky area because Ayurveda started to get organized about 5,000 years ago and to be taught in a consistent way. And the main texts that are used were written about 2,300 years ago. So they knew nothing about North America or any other place. They knew a little bit about Chinese herbs and maybe a very few European herbs that were being traded across Eurasia. And so those were the things that they had. And so when you read about the herbs in these ancient texts, they talked about the herbs that they knew. But now that it's been around for a while, we've looked at other herbs from other places, Europe and North America, and figured out how they work from an Ayurvedic perspective. So there are no Ayurvedic herbs, just herbs used Ayurvedically. So an herb like echinacea that's from North America that never would have been seen in India, we now know how to use that from an Ayurvedic perspective. So Ayurveda is a lens through which to view the world. Different opinions about how well we've done that. I mean, there are definitely people who are educated in India that feel like if the herb wasn't mentioned in a 2,000-year-old book, then we shouldn't be using it. That's not me. I'm very much a modern practitioner and a mixer, and I'm willing to use any or all these things, in any way. Also, these things are quite available to us. Any herb that you want to get from Asia, you can get quite easily if you know where to go, and they're available, and they can arrive in a couple days.
Right. Okay. And of course, that global connection with the world now definitely makes things a lot easier than it probably even was 10 or 20 years ago.
Very much.
So I'm going to just sidestep a little bit because I'm seeing, as we're going through this, I'm seeing the similarities between traditional Chinese medicine, which, as you said, probably evolved from Ayurveda. What would be the closest practice to things like acupuncture in Ayurveda? Because there's a lot of movement of energy in acupuncture, and I'm just wondering, what that would be.
Yeah, archaeologists think that acupuncture arose from Ayurveda.
Oh, okay.
The same meridian system that's used in Chinese medicine is used in Ayurveda. And so there are reflex points and energy flow patterns in the body. If we go back to some archaeological digs from thousands of years ago, we find acupuncture or meridian maps for not only people, but dogs, horses, elephants. Initially, the needles were made out of bone or stone. So that was, different situation. And as those ideas gradually flowed eastward, the Chinese civilization perfected the use of those fine metal needles. They're now used in India as well. But Ayurveda is more likely to use some kind of external treatment of those points, like finger pressure or applying medicine to the points, something like that, as opposed to needling. Ayurveda does some needling, but that has become more of the specialty of Chinese medicine.
Okay, that makes sense. And how does chakras weave into that? Because they're not so much a TCM thing, but we use those a lot because we see so much energy flow through them, and even to analyze people and see kind of what might be going wrong with them. I've always found one person usually has a chakra deficiency if they're in pain. How do you view those as a practitioner?
Yeah, the whole idea of chakras comes from yoga. That's what I was saying earlier, that yoga and Ayurveda, technically speaking, have slightly different roots. Yoga was developed by people who wanted to evolve quickly and they were functioning outside the normal social structure of India at the time, and so they lived, as we know, in caves and things like that, but camps and villages outside the normal social structure, and they were not focused on the kinds of rules about who you could marry and what you could eat and that kind of thing. They just wanted to work on their human evolution. So they were outside of society. Ayurveda evolved within conventional society in India, but there were people who did both things, and gradually those two groups of people began to uh, meet each other and meld their traditions until we got to about 1,000 years ago, when they essentially became one. So even though they come from different origins, um, they now use the same philosophy and like that. So Ayurveda per se, in its most pure historical form, does not include chakras. None of those texts from 2,000 years ago talk a bit about chakras. They just do talk about energy, but they don't talk about chakras. That was the thing, something from yoga. So
Okay.
any given Ayurvedic practitioner may or may not relate to the chakras, although I would say most do now.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. So it just kind of wove its way in there, and that's why it's not. Okay. So traditionally, it would not be something that would even be viewed. You'd just be looking at the energy flow of the body in general. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So obviously, here at Pain Free for Life, we work with a lot of people in pain, and we're looking towards resolution. Conventional medicine focuses so much on symptom control. How does Ayurveda address symptom control versus long-term support and even resolving issues?
Well, there's definitely a conflict in our culture because people want something that works immediately, and we have things like opiates that do work immediately, and that's what people want, and that's our competition. So,
Yes.
Ayurveda ideally would say that we would like to get to the root cause of the issue, which means going back to the basic physiological functions of your body, digestion, functioning of the nervous system, your liver, all that stuff. Start from the beginning, get that all fixed, and 99% of the time, the pain is resolved. But that takes a while. People are hesitant to do that. So Ayurveda prefers to work on the root causes, but is okay working with symptoms out of compassion, just because people hurt and we want to help them. So ideally, if we were going to do that, we'd work on their pain first and help them feel better. And once that's well stabilized, then dig backwards into the underlying reason that it happened and fix that. In our culture, that's tricky to do. If you treat the symptoms first, then people just want to keep doing whatever gave them the relief of the symptoms and not go after the root cause. If you go to the root cause first, people quit because they're not getting symptom relief quick enough. So today, we pretty much have to treat symptoms first, and then hopefully we can educate people enough in the meantime to go after the long-term issues.
Yeah, we see that challenge as well because it's with the world of testing and stuff and people feeling better. If you push to get rid of the symptoms and then they go and they do a test and they're like, oh look, all of my levels of everything are back to normal, I can go back to my previous lifestyle.
Yeah, that's right.
We're just not really getting that issue fixed.
Yeah.
And that's always been something I've been concerned about, is just enabling that process. But yeah, I can see the difficulty there of trying to blend both. Okay, so how specifically can Ayurveda help with pain? Like, what are some practical examples you would give? Is it so individualized that you can't make some suggestions, or are there some generalized ones for people dealing with chronic
Well, I can
pain?
give you generalized suggestions. Yeah. So I mentioned that connection with people that are cold and dry. And I mentioned all those different kinds of dryness, and those people tend to be constipated. So one of the things that we can do is redirect bowel function properly, do whatever is needed through diet and herbal medicine to make sure that people have at least one bowel movement a day and that it's comfortable and soft and moist and all that. And that will start to unravel one aspect of that whole situation. So to treat that dry, unstable metabolism, we want to use warming treatments in general, and that would be eating well cooked food rather than raw food, for example, a diet of moist kinds of foods, nutritive soups, things like that. Treat gas. Gas is intimately involved in pain. Anxiety causes gas. We know that. Anybody that's ever had a big test coming up or something and they have that gurgling guts kind of issue, we know that that's a factor. So some things like coriander would be beneficial for that. That's a mildly warming digestive aid. And there are a couple of herbs from India that are both valerians. So one is just called Indian valerian. You can get that. The other is called jetamunsi. Both of these are warming herbs that reduce gas, promote the health of the gut, but also they're calming and anti-anxiety things that can help people sleep. So the two kinds of valerian from India. Ayurveda has really made a study of topical kinds of treatments, body work, and especially with herbal oils. It's just the absolute high point of Ayurvedic pharmacology to use these oils. They're oils that have been infused with herbs. The herbs are cooked into the oil, and there are many, many of them, dozens, if not hundreds, but they're just beautiful. They smell great. They feel great. One of the most famous is an herb called, or an oil called Mahanarayan. I'll spell that. It's Mahanarayan, Mahanarayan. And this is the number one musculoskeletal oil in all of Ayurveda. Every grandma has that in her medicine cabinet for her arthritis. I use it constantly with people. Most people really like the feeling. It doesn't feel like very much when you put it on, but by applying it 2, 3, 4 times a day as a whole body treatment or a spot treatment, people begin to feel better consistently week after week. Now, that doesn't cure the underlying problem of, the processed food, like we were talking about, all those other things. So it makes people feel better temporarily, and they would have to just do that forever. It's not going to hurt you to do it forever. In fact, probably a good idea. But it's a treatment that's meant to benefit the pain temporarily. Now, a lot of human pain is from inflammation. So inflammation is a hot condition as opposed to a colder kind of condition. So you have a hot body, for example, from the Ayurvedic perspective. I have a cold body from the Ayurvedic perspective. So our diets and treatments are going to be somewhat different. So for inflammation, for people that have excess heat systemically or in one particular kind of place, they're going to use a cooling diet. So green vegetables, for example, are very cooling. One food that's particularly cooling is bitter melon. Now, that's a food from Asia that is beloved by probably 3 billion people on planet Earth who eat it very regularly. It's very common in China and India and that whole area of Asia. But it's quite bitter. It's probably the bitterest food you're ever going to taste. But it's one of the coldest foods that we can eat. In other words, anti-inflammatory. Those terms mean the same, basically. So bitter melon, I really like it. I get great clinical results with it. I happen to like the taste, but most people, when they first taste it, just say, I would never eat that in a million years. But I'm telling you, 3 billion people on planet Earth do. So it's an acquired taste. Otherwise, cooling herbs like andrographis, that's an herb that's getting a lot of attention in Western herbalism now, but it's been used in Ayurveda. That's a very, very cold herb, andrographis. The herb willow bark. Willows grow on every continent, so all the big 3 systems of herbalism use them, and that was the original source of aspirin. So willow is a cooling, anti-inflammatory, but also analgesic remedy, and it doesn't have the side effects of aspirin. The disadvantage is the dose has to be fairly high, which is the problem with a lot of these things. So if you're going to use turmeric for inflammation, you have to take more than people are used to. So that's always an issue with any of these natural healing systems. So the typical dose of willow to treat inflammatory pain is about 30 grams. So you'd weigh out 30 grams of chopped willow bark, cook that into tea, and drink that tea, which is going to be, a couple big mugs of herbal mud,
Right.
Which, is challenging for people, but it works very well. Anyway, those are some good possibilities.
That's awesome. There's so many different things there. Well, something came into my mind here that I've been asked a lot, and I think it's probably going to relate, but I'm interested in the answer to this. So we have kind of in the West demonized certain food groups, dairy, gluten being 2 high ones. How is that viewed from an Ayurvedic perspective? Because you kind of said everyone's an individual. I found growing up in the UK, I never had issues with dairy. Sometimes I do here now, and so many people I know seem to. So what's kind of the perspective on that?
Well, the underlying Ayurvedic perspective is that there is no food that's demonized. There are some things that generally would not be suitable. I mean, like spoiled food or something, but categories of food, no. And the problem you're mentioning has to do with the quality of those things. And the same experience with my clients, I don't have any difficulty with dairy here, although for my particular dairy is a cold food. I have a cold metabolism. I typically don't consume it, but it doesn't give me any symptoms. But I send clients to India that have very noticeable dairy sensitivity, and they eat a piece of cheese, they get a runny nose or diarrhea or a tummy ache or something. They go to India, they try a little bit of tea with some milk in it, nothing happens. Then they eat, a bunch of cheese, and by the end of their 2-week vacation, they're gobbling down milk in India with no problems, and they think, "Hey, I went on vacation and my dairy problems solved." They come back. The first bite, they have their old symptoms back. So it's a problem with the actual way that the milk is produced. In India, the animal that we would call a cow, and then in English, it's called a cow in India, but it's not actually a cow. It's a zebu, which is a cousin to a cow. So there are a number of animals in that family, including a bison and water buffalo, and they're closely related, but they produce a milk that's slightly different than the European cow. And the protein problem in the European cow that bothers people, the casein, is different in the zebu, and so many people are fine with it. Likewise with the wheat. Clients go to India, they try a bite of pasta, nothing happens. They come by the end of the vacation, they're gobbling down pasta every day. There's something about the way it's either grown or processed. I don't think we know all the details, but I agree with you that both of those categories are problematic here. And there's a lot of factors. The digestive tracts of people are not functioning as well as they could generally. And then all those issues about the type of wheat and how it was produced and all of that. There seems to be something that's sort of inherently difficult about digesting wheat and milk anyway that make it more problematic. No one's having problem with lettuce. But, those two things, and Ayurveda would say that those foods are heavy, meaning that it takes more digestive fire to be able to digest them. And so that makes them inherently more likely to have digestive problems.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it popped into my head because I was thinking about you were talking about the cooling foods and things like that. And I was like, surely milk would be one of those very cooling foods. Yeah, so many people are like, oh, no, we shouldn't ever take milk. We shouldn't ever drink it. So I was just curious. So that makes a lot of sense. And that kind of reflects my experience too, different areas of the world. And I do wonder if it comes down to even genetics and like where you've come from in a genetic standpoint and what's in there. There's a lot of different factors, I suppose.
Yeah, very much so.
So I'm going to hit you with one last question, and it's possibly a big one. You've mentioned cold, warm-bodied individuals. How does one know what they are? Because if that's such a big part of this medicine and the foods you eat, how do you know?
There are questionnaires on Ayurveda websites, and so these energy distinctions are called doshas, DOSHA. And so you can just Google dosha questionnaire, and you'll come up with 50 of them. They're all over the place. I don't have one on my website. And I'm just kind of think about a way that we could get those to you. Are you posting resources from this interview on your website? Oh, yes. I'll send you that information then.
Perfect. So yeah, we'll be able to put that in the show notes, and everyone will be able to take a look at that by the time the episode goes out.
We'll do it that way.
Perfect. Yeah, I just think it's a fascinating topic, and I think that there's so much we can do with it right off the bat. But if we kind of need to know where we're at, so we're not feeding the wrong side of things, right? And that totally makes sense.
That's exactly it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, KP, for coming on the show again. I really appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
And to our listeners, as I said, I will include all of KP's information in the show notes at painfreeforlife.com/podcast. So until next time, I'm Dr. Rob Vanbergen, and you're listening to Pain Free for Life.
Thanks for listening to Pain Free for Life. Be sure to follow us, share the show with family and friends, and leave us a review on iTunes. Every time you share the show, you are helping someone take their life back from pain. Visit painfreeforlife.com for more resources, including our free guides to microcurrent, the Hache protocol and inflammation, as well as our blog and online community full of people just like you, successfully overcoming all kinds of chronic and extreme conditions to live happy, productive, pain-free lives forever. And stay tuned for the next episode of Pain Free for Life.